Hey, church family. Pastor Eric here with today's Word from the Word. And in part two, we want to talk about the idea of debatable matters found in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 13. And the aspect that I'd like to focus on today is this idea of knowledge. Now, I love knowing. I have a very inquisitive mind. If I see a movie about a historical personality, I generally go read about that personality. If I have something that somebody brings up that I don't know much about, I'll probably go and read. I like acquiring knowledge, but there's a danger in that when it comes to spiritual things. I remember being a teenager when I came to Christ, and some of you have heard this story, but when I came to Christ, I was in high school, and I started going to a church and a youth group, and throughout school, I had always kind of excelled in the academic area. But what was interesting is, here I was in high school, in a church setting, and I was sitting in a place where I knew nothing about the Bible. I knew very little, if anything, about my faith. I just knew at that point that I loved Jesus. So I started going to the youth group, and they were doing a study in the book of Judges. And we had our group lesson, and then we would break into small groups and talk with our leaders there about the story. And what was interesting is we got into the small group, one of the students in my group started referring to Samson and the story of Samson and Delilah and what happens when we depart from God. When I found myself sitting there in amazement, not saying a word, because I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, Samson's a real guy? I just thought it was a movie that I saw. It's based on an actual person, and I need to pay attention to that story. And I found myself being very captivated by what is in the Bible. So in the next years that came, I read my Bible constantly. I wanted to learn all the stories. I even started teaching Sunday school to 5-year-olds because I needed to learn the stories at a very basic level. And as my understanding grew, I began to find, like most areas of my life, I enjoyed acquiring the knowledge. I enjoyed learning more and seeing how things connected. The problem with that is that as I got to a degree of competency, as I began to really grasp some of the issues, I found myself caught up in the knowledge trap. And what I mean by the knowledge trap is it was in my head, but I wasn't giving it time or application to let it feed into my heart. What happens with people who get caught in the knowledge trap is they become prideful. And they think they know everything, and they think they have the right to tell everybody else everything, when in fact they're not even living out the very things that they're telling people to do. It becomes easy to point your finger at them and not at yourself. So, humility as a part of distinguishing knowledge from practice is important. And your knowledge and practice can't be two separate things. They need to be a coherent whole. They need to be two pieces of a puzzle that come together and form one large piece. And that's important in the Christian life. Most of us spend most of our lives going one way or the other. We have people that lead with their heart and their feelings, and those are God-given. But if they're not accompanied by knowledge, you've only got half the picture. On the other hand, you've got people who are leading with their heads and their knowledge. And if the heart doesn't come along, they're only dealing with half the picture. We need to combine our knowledge that's in our head with the transformed life that's in our hearts in order to live and to love like Jesus. That was part of the problem for the religious leaders of Jesus' day. Those men called Pharisees and Sadducees who were just so full of knowledge, but their hearts were far from God in the sense that they didn't understand. They loved God and they wanted to pursue Him, but they thought they only needed to pursue Him with their heads and not with their hearts. And Jesus is saying you need to do both. You need to put both of those into practice. And Paul writes about that here in chapter 8 when he's talking about how knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. He's giving us two sides of the coin. You have to have knowledge in order to love well, but you must have the right heart in order to know well. So I want to ask you, do you tend to lead with your heart or do you tend to lead with your head? All of us will lean one way or the other. And for people who lead with their head, like me, there's this lag time where you're trying to make the heart catch up to it. So please figure out which one you are. And if you lead with your heart instead, you gotta go back to the scriptures and say, how do I get my head to catch up with my heart? If your head's not involved, then your heart's maybe not even in the right place. And if it's just your head without your heart, you're liable to become legalistic, judgmental, critical, and you're outside of God's will as well. So which way do you lean, and how are you going to facilitate moving forward to become more like Jesus, living and loving like him, not just knowing about him? Hope this helps. God bless you. Have a great rest of the week.